As the Democratic Party was still reeling over the alleged anti-Semitic comments made by Representative Ilhan Omar, President Donald Trump continued to stoke the fire on his Twitter account, quoting remarks on Fox News made by a woman named Elizabeth Pipko, who heads an organization called Jexodus. Jewish people are leaving the Democratic Party, Pipko said. We saw a lot of anti-Israel policies start under the Obama administration, and it got worse and worse. There is anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. They don't care about Israel or the Jewish people. So who is Pipko and what is Jexodus? On its website, it calls itself a group of, quote, proud Jewish millennials tired of living in bondage to leftist politics. And according to the Daily Wire, Jexodus was created by Jeff Balaban, a Republican Jewish political operative who serves as an advisor to the Trump campaign. And last week on the Fox Business Channel, he called Ilhan Omar filth. I'm very happy now to be joined here in studio by Breitbart Mideast Bureau Chief Aaron Klein, and from our studios in New York, opinion editor for The Forward, Batya Ungar-Sargon. Thanks, guys. It's great to see you. I want to start with you, Batya. You know, for a very small movement that was really just born, this thing is making a lot of news, mostly due to the president's tweet. But how seriously should we take it?
The American Jewish community is never going to Jexodus from the Democratic Party en masse for three reasons: because of who the Republicans are, because of who the Democrats are, and because of who American Jews are. The Republicans are the party that blocked a resolution that Democrats tried to pass when President Trump said that there were very fine people in the neo-Nazi party who marched on Charlottesville.
No, he didn't.
Okay?
I'm sorry, that's fake news.
All you need to know about the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is the party who, the day after a person in their own party said something anti-Semitic, they rebuked her, and the next week they passed resolution. That is all you need to know about the Democrats. The Jewish American community defines its Jewishness in liberal terms. This is what polling shows again and again and again. What it means to be an American Jew is to believe in equality, in justice, and in welcoming the stranger. The Democrats are not perfect on this, but they are light years ahead of the party that is ripping babies from their mother's breasts.
All right, Aaron Klein, respond to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, but the Democrat Party has a serious anti-Semitic problem on its hand. You have the progressive wing of the Democrat Party that is essentially siding openly many times with the anti-Israel BDS movement. In this case, in the case of Ilhan Omar, she said what is inarguably anti-Semitic tropes. In fact, actually, the comments that she made were the very definition, according to the State Department and according to, I think, 27 countries that got together and defined anti-Semitism. The examples of anti-Semitism that they gave are the two very statements that Ilhan Omar made. And the point here is that the Democrat Party did not specifically rebuke Ilhan Omar. Instead, they had this watered-down resolution.
Well, Aaron, let me ask you this. Okay, despite what Ilhan Omar said, anti-Semitic, not anti-Semitic, is it okay? The president seems to be really fanning the flames. Is it really okay to call the whole Democratic Party anti-Jewish?
When you have a representative, a congresswoman who here made openly anti-Semitic statements, and the 2020 main presidential candidates can't condemn those as anti-Semitic other than Kirsten Gillibrand, but you had Bernie Sanders, you had Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, that came out and essentially defended Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitic statements. And again, the entire Democrat Party that sat there based on nothing and accused the most pro-Israel president in American history repeatedly of anti-Semitism, they couldn't condemn anti-Semitism specifically without watering it down and condemning all kinds of hate when the issue here is anti-Semitism.
Batya, what's your reaction to that and the president's tweet? You know, people are claiming that it's really stoking the fire in the Democratic Party, and maybe, you know, they've earned it. If they can't condemn Ilhan Omar immediately, they have a problem.
I mean, they did condemn her immediately, right? When she made the "it's all about the Benjamins" comment, they rebuked her immediately and she apologized. They passed a resolution that condemns anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and white supremacy. Which of those things should we not be condemning? That is what I do not understand. Like, those are three illnesses of this country. We need to condemn them all. I think it was a beautiful resolution, and that resolution shows the diversity of the Democratic Party, the gorgeous diversity, as opposed to the Republicans, and it shows shows how we are willing to come together in order to fight all forms of bigotry. That is literally what the Jewish American community stands for. But this wasn't about all forms of bigotry.
This was in direct response to Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitic tropes. You had, on the other hand, by the way, a Republican member of Congress, Stephen King, who made a very controversial statement about white nationalism. He was specifically by name censured, and there was a resolution censoring him.
It certainly took the party a long time, didn't it?
Yeah, well, in this case, the party didn't even censor Ilhan Omar. They had nothing to say other than to water it down.
What about the President of the United States?
The President of the United States is one of the best friends that Israel has.
Nobody rebuked President Trump. The people who tried to rebuke... Why are you are confusing Israel and the American Jewish community exactly the way Trump did in this tweet, by the way, and exactly the way Trump does every time we ask him to condemn his own anti-Semitic comments. He says, "I'm a friend to Israel."
Wait,
that's exactly the problem.
Are you not concerned? You're telling me, wait,
Israel
Batya,
and the American Jewish community.
Batya, so you are not concerned about the progressive wing of the Democrat Party that sides with anti-Israel, pro-BDS groups like MoveOn.org, like Black Lives Matter, like the litany, really, of regressive, a.k.a. progressive, anti-Israel organizations. It doesn't concern you that you have a wing within the Democrat Party and even a caucus, main members of the Congressional Black Caucus, that refuse to condemn Louis Farrakhan and instead have been tied to him? You're not concerned as a Jew about the growing, rising tide of anti-Semitism
Batya, a quick response, and then let's move on.
Progressive Party?
I think that's total whataboutism. I could say back to him, you're not concerned that the president peddled an anti-Semitic canard that got 11 Jews murdered. But that's not the point. I'm going to stick to my own side. And what I see in the Democratic Party is huge amounts of diversity and an attempt to create a coalition. And I see they condemned her twice. They condemned her once, and they wrote a resolution against her.
They defended her.
Republicans have failed. This was the first time they ever condemned white supremacy. This is the first time they ever condemned Islamophobia. So no, I'm not concerned. I will say, to Aaron's point, I thought that Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren's statements were deplorable. I thought that they were horrific in that they accepted this false narrative that Omar was criticizing Israel, and she wasn't. She was criticizing the U.S. ties to Israel.
I want to show you both something that was said 3 hours after the president's tweet by Howard Kaur, who heads AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and he gave testimony in a House hearing on foreign aid and was asked about making Israel a political football by Congresswoman Nita Lowey. Let's hear his answer.
We believe deeply that for the United States to continue to maintain its critical role in the region and support for Israel requires both Democrats and Republicans to continue to work together. We think this is still vital to the United States, and we think there's an important reason for this issue to be an opportunity to bring Democrats and Republicans together. So we will do everything we can to continue to ensure that bipartisanship remains as a central issue of the United States. As we like to say, the American support for Israel is not a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's an American issue, and we deeply believe that.
So, Aaron, he wants it to be a bipartisan issue, but is that the case today, or is that just wishful thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it should be a bipartisan issue. Anybody who cares about America, who cares about Western civilization, who cares about democracy, you would think would side with the only democracy in the Middle East. The problem is that the progressive wing of the Democrat Party, and again, major 2020 presidential candidates, are turning really anti-Israel attitudes into a significant issue within the Democrat Party. I mean, you have Bernie Sanders, who spews anti-Israel conspiracies. I mean, goes even beyond Hamas with some of the claims that he's made against the Israeli Defense Forces. You have, for Obama, by the way, before he even came to office, I'm sorry, there was a lot of concern about him palling around with anti-Israel extremists, sitting in a church for 20-something years with a pastor who was spewing anti-Semitic, anti-Israel rhetoric, and yet the same media that repeatedly asks Donald Trump, based on nothing, to condemn anti-Semitism didn't say a word under Obama, and so that's a significant part of the problem here, the media.
Your response to this one, especially when you heard what Howard Kaur was saying, is that the case today, or is it just wishful thinking that Israel is still a bipartisan issue?
You were talking about Beto O'Rourke right before.
Yeah.
We have an incredibly diverse 2020 Democratic presidential field. Every single one of those people has the same exact politics on Israel.
Not
They're
true.
all pro-Israel
Bernie
and
Sanders,
anti-BDS. What I am seeing
Bernie
is...
Sanders called for the U.S. to stop all military aid to Israel. Not a single 2020 presidential candidate. Yes, he did.
Anyway,
no, it's not. Yes, he did.
He defines himself as pro-Israel and anti-BDS, just like every other one of them. What I am seeing in Elizabeth Warren and even Amy Klobuchar is the admirable impulse to criticize Israel under Netanyahu, who just made a coalition with a totally racist party. That's, by the way, where American Jews are at. Pro-Israel, critical of Israel, willing to stand up and say, not in my name, willing to stand up and say, how can we leverage the closeness between the U.S. and Israel to end the occupation of the Palestinians? So I'm seeing American Jewish values reflected in the Democratic 2020 field across the board.
Really,
so
what I'm seeing is something very different.
Right.
I mean, you have Kirsten Gillibrand, who, by the way, I think in her herself is personally pro-Israel, but she's palling around with Linda Sarsour, anti-Semite, and in fact actually took her name off of an anti-BDS bill that she herself sponsored because she understands, Gillibrand reads the tea leaves, she understands that today, heading to 2020 in the presidential race, if you're going to be a Democrat contender, you've got to side with the anti-Israel progressive side. It's that simple. And I think Gillibrand is the perfect bellwether for, unfortunately, what's happening to the Democrat Party today.
Batya, we have 30 seconds left. I need a quick response. You know, the AIPAC convention is coming up. Is the issue of debate over Israel going to be the elephant in the room that, you know, that nobody talks about?
In an age when Bibi Netanyahu is literally saying there will never be a Palestinian state, which means that Palestinians will live under occupation perpetually, and when he is making common cause with avowed racists, it is a moral imperative to criticize Israel, and I'm glad to see the Democrats doing that without abandoning Israel.
20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, the Palestinians rejected every state offer, but the issue here is, yes, the fact that we're even sitting around and talking about this shows you, Batya, there is a major anti-Semitic problem within the Democrat Party, and it needs to be condemned. It wasn't condemned the way that we wanted to see it.
All right.